다티제라 단다 바르도 숨바테 다단다 바르도 니바테 차상제 휴세네 다 바르도 숨바테 균이 외살게 바르도래라 균이 외살게 바르도 데라 다 가두 차르게 요아레세나 드네 다 레위니 비난도 헤베 템름데 차상 조네 데네 다 깔람도 말람데 조네 데네 다 디게 다 대화침보 험다 데네 단다 히랍증오 아항 이보데 다 접수에 받대 트네 소농데 로알라테네 다 단다 데네 다디 차르기 요아라 주니 바르도 차르기 요아라 주니 바르도 데다 된다 간데질라 거기 요아레세나 나란소 넘버 상지바 제이다와 온드세나 데네 단다 데네 동인 다음에 봐서 주던지 동반이 임바다 디나니 조 당아 냠던지 미르데 마드바 다음에 베게다는 거기 요아라 데네 데용 다음에 봐싱기데 지탕근 나란소 강가 나이 냠다 징기 요아라 데네 나이 냠던 좀바데 라 테니페 테니 녜몬바타 남동년 반중에 짜완다고 진도가 요아래 가르레세나 해당지기는 나란네 바짤청 섬니 해당지기 요아래 테니 대샤지기는 나라고도 손 대샤지기 요아래라 다 데이터북에 녜몬바탐지 그 짜와데 단zen 두고 요아래 단zen데 응니 다 단zen데 마방나 녜몬바테 파실 고 넘바정기레 마도 짜와네 빵토게요 마레 갑가라다 녜몬바 총도 땅양다고 요아레데 이네 짜와네 빵토게요 마레라 다 짜와네 빵야 데라 다 녜몬바 짜와데 단zen이 베츠나 단zen데 빵고요 단zen데 빵워 제발라 간데세 빵고요 와레스나 나 다든생기미 나 단zen 봉기 섬니 빵고그레베 빵토그레베스나 빵토게요 마레 다 딜라 준신 제 요아레라 단zen 게 따위기 열디 다디 문이 가와도 제제다나 다디 요마레 다 매발란 통나 당보 히랍 그 따히지네 다 매발란 통 드니 다 매바데 감나 드니 다 매바데 무스 냠스 뇽도 드니 단zen 데랑히 그 도로 요아레라 드니 데야 땅아란츠 그다나 냠도 짐베게 열데 드니 갑깔라 룰라 짐베게 손다보데 갑깔라 다 다동 다그른 자인 두텔라 땡땡라 메바 드니 갑깔라 나 냠도 룰란 짐바다 갑깔라 다글루 세두 드니 다 룰레 옌도 주 다제 예바 난긴다보데 드니 갑깔라 루볼라야 다근고 세두 양고데 다마이바 나긴데 다그 라바 세나 라바데 다마이 반다보체 나랑게 강바 세나 강바데 다마이 반다보체 다틴데 세네 준두데랑 은니게 나 형던 점베게 류데 나 형던 점베게 열데 테네 류지 곤주 때문에 강도 촐나야 니야메 반다보체 다 다갑가랑 나이 셈 세기야라 셈테야 나임바다 나이임바 텐테라 메바 테니 셈테 마두바임 비처나 우니 다데 카바드테나 다데 요마레라 다메발라 다든지기 요레 테토발라 다메버토바스 다 대견도 대타부기 열대 탐지 좀다 지탕기 주탐지 대락바니 차왈라 실베 갑슬라 테니 모랑hin기 마두바텔라 똥바니 숨비요
Now we turn to the third of the four intervals or bardos. And we've completed looking at the second of these. The third interval is called the interval of dharmata, the clear light. And the interval of dharmata starts when the dissolution that comprised the preceding interval is complete. not only the coarse external dissolution of the elements, but also the subtle internal dissolution, the experience of white appearance, red increase, and black attainment. So, as you'll remember, what happens during that final dissolution is that the white constituent in the head, great bliss, the syllable hum, descends, and the red constituent below the navel, discernment, the syllable ah, rises up, and they meet in the heart. When they meet in the heart, then this interval, this bardo, starts. To understand the experience of this interval, we need to return to the basic Buddhist concept of emptiness and selflessness. In general, Buddhist doctrine is very much concerned with emptiness, the nature of all things, and especially its aspect of the selflessness of persons, which is the fact that what we think of as I or me simply does not exist. We all run around thinking I am, in the sense of I exist, and I am me. And this idea and this fixation which underlies this idea, these are the root of all kleshas. If we don't have this fixation on a self, we will not give rise to desire or attachment. We will not give rise to hatred or aversion. Conversely, as long as we do not have not gotten rid of this fixation on the self, we will never get rid of the kleshas. The best you can manage without giving up the fixation on the self is the temporary suppression or weakening of the kleshas, but their eradication is impossible. So we must face the fact that we simply have to get rid of this fixation on the self. We must do it. But can we do it simply by resolving to do it? Can we realize selflessness by saying to ourselves, I will not fixate on the self. I refuse to do it. We can't. We can't eradicate fixation on the self through such an act of will alone. The only way it can be eradicated is by directly seeing that there is no self. Through seeing selflessness, one eradicates the fixation on a self. And this seeing is accomplished using a two-step process. The first step is examination. Examination of the imputed self and examination of the basis or bases of that imputation. The second step is meditation on or contemplation of the selflessness which is determined or resolved upon through examination. The first thing we discover when we start to look at this imputed self is that the basis of its imputation is shifty. It's shifty in the sense that the basis on which or to which we impute the self is not always the same thing. The concept that we give rise to that is most closely aligned with the concept of I is mine. And we relate things that we do not at that moment identify with the self to the self as possessions of or pertaining to the self and call them mine. So clearly, I and mine are different. I refers to the self, and mine or my refers to that which belongs to or pertains to, but is not the self. Sometimes the basis for our imputation of personal self seems to be our body. Sometimes we think of our body as I or as me. But at other times it is not, because quite often we say, my body. If your body is your body, it is not you. Sometimes we think that the self is the head, that the head part of the body is the real self and the rest sort of belongs to it. But yet we still say, my head. Any part of the body you can think of can be thought of as a possession of the self, all the way from my head down to my foot. In short, no matter where you look throughout your body, and no matter how small an area you select within the body for examination, you will never find a consistent and invariable basis for imputation of the self. Therefore, there is no part of the body that has the characteristics that we impute to the self of always being what it is, always being the self. Often we identify the self with our mind, yet we still go around saying, my mind. In short, if you track down every possible basis for imputation of the self, and you determine that none of these are consistent and invariable bases for such an imputation that actually possess the imputed characteristics, and you exhaust all possible bases of imputation, you determine that there cannot be such a thing as a self. And this is the understanding of selflessness. When the understanding of the absence of a personal self is extended to include a similar understanding of the absence of inherent or true existence of any phenomenon you could name, coarse or subtle, then that is an understanding of what is called emptiness.
Tene ta te ya tongba ni te ya ta tangbo ngaranzo song tana ta ngaranzo la lupo senkite ngaranzo lu te zubo te ta ngaranzo ye ndo ngarang lu ya ye yenji lu ya ndo somba yore te yina nguni sena yo mare la karire sena lupo te la ngo yore te lupo mare teni lakpa yor teni kangba yor teni pakpa yor teni sha yor teni rupa yor ta tenzo rinpa yendo la salna ta lupo singkite kabandu te na lupo singkite tsani goye jitsu ne gongpa pati na ta lupo nguni ndere ba sangzi nyeyo mar kurantu ngupo yendo yada la 다 대견도 락반다보지 있나야 락바티 락바 생긴 도도제 문이 예대 반다보지 요래데 있나야 드니 락바티라 드니 대봉다 좀모다 고모다 스마다 태우종다 다 딘데지나 루바다 딘데지나 다이 락바 생긴데 아니에요 말이라 다 대견도 좀모다보지 야 락바다 루보티 요 말에든 좀모다보지 요아래서나 대책 당보다 책임바다 책숨바다 세모시나 대대한 주모대야 요 말이라 다 대따르도 타긴 타와네 리리견들 때나 드닝문이 도만 두비 공부다보지라 누이 풍보 봉가바다보지라 드니 풍보시 따이가바지 산지 좀 된데지 좀 풍보시 따바래라 망보야 봉가바지 마도 문이 코란 도도도 주받는 자와니 요 말이 드니 대견도 다 타긴 타와니지나 두팅게 바들 다 두팅게 넘발 두팅에 있나야 코란 카타수게 온게 샤라 카타와도 누라 카타와다 딘데게 차힌다고 지시나 문이시나 단도 요 말이라 디처나 드니 산지 좀 된데지 좀 조동바오 소네 대 조동문이 요 말에 동바니레 시송하래 다 대다부가 더 매바다 드니 대 동바니 대 가리리세는 ngaransu zuiga pa mare kora yi nelu tiri kora tomba ni te ngaransu tanda tomba hako yo mare yana ripi dudu tela hako yo te ripi dudu hako yo re de na ya giba khirap ti go ne hako yo 다 대다부 동반이 대 다 돈이 세그래 상지점 된 되지 다음부 주진 걸로 염히라지 바로 듣는 공발에 다 대라야 동반이 시다 대진 요 말에 강가 둘티데 무보레 진 마트 바레 돈이 레세도 동반이 대진 해봐지 레베세나 다 대진 해봐 말에 진 해봐 대라 뱀동 세그래 뱀동 넘가다 보세 namka tongban rabo chi yina bem tong re kola sachan rabo kanya yo ma re ko bembo kukwan rabo chi yo re ruan rabo chi yo re ta ngaran su chu tang chi ki tong ite kante chi re se na te la sarcha yihi ki namba yo re sarcha kanga ha kowa kanga char to ruwa kanga che hi su ruwa salwa ki namba chi yo re la te la teni sanji ki himbo yo sunga yo re teni te la dewar hi bi himbo yo sunga yo re ta te ngaran su tanda ripita hinji pe kal ta te gambi nyans nyo kabla ya ta te la tene kam dal ngaran su thi nam song yo re la tene choje chimbu ka so la lenji ji ye hi se ta te la ngaran su ye demani te yo re ta na ngaran su ha ko yo ma re te yo re tene zokchin pa thang ji ke tene zoba chimbu ta cheche ka ta go on da sina riba hi to pe pa se ke sung yo re 다 된다고 되네 다 되긴도 퇴가와 남지서나 순도 왜지 놓아선 거요 그래서 다 대답이 그 놓아대 단다 나란서 그 검니 중앙에 비시나 검니 중앙 말에 라 되네 사르도 중앙 말에 예 데마니 나란서 닐 띵앙도 요아레디 이나요 나란서 띵뭐 마히니 출소하래라 된 출바 임베처나 되니 다 단다데 림비게 키와데 토도 바이용 가서라 되는 게 뭐한테 저 림지 돈이 사초라템 초멜라템 멜롱라템 롱남칼라템 되는 넘버 키발라템 림비게 돈도 가서라 주인이 동봉도 템도 요아래 되니 티카드나라 주인이 동바 대 샤르용 요아래 되니 대 주인이 동바 대 샤르용 요아래 주인이 동봉어데 데어히비 힘보세나인다 차제침보세나인다 데샤리용거 요아래 조바침보세나인다 데샤리용거 요아래 주지 양데 샤리용거 요아래데 샤리용거 요아래라 데샤리용거 요두텔라 간데 용거 요아래세나 나란솔라 드니제 냠뇨 쳬버티 데지 검용키 델 냠뇨 용키지이나 데티티카드나라 하고기 요아래가 나랑게 검데바데레바스 하고기 ta gom manyon kin ji ina te pha tomba le yal son no ji jin din me pa ji ngone tni mari pa de yal sor don yo la te ngoni harju de ye ne lu gi ji inde sha ge yo re de dan do ngoni ngosen yo mare ta tanda ya ji tang aran so yo re de ina ya tanda ngosen yo mare la de yin de chiwa ge to de pa und ngoni di chu ji yin ji ye ne lu de sha ge yo re de ina ya sha ge yo mare ngosen yo mare la ta te ngosen ba kanti gogresina ngaranso inchi minchi nyomslenti kalchi
When we think about the concept of emptiness, it always implies to us some kind of nothingness, some kind of absolute absence of anything. And therefore, it seems to contradict our experience, because we say, well, my body isn't empty. It is not empty of existence. My body exists. The bodies of others exist. These things exist. I can see them and feel them. In fact, your body does not exist. What we call our bodies, what a person calls his or her body, is a group of things considered as though it were a unit. A body contains several things: a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, skin, flesh, bone, organs, all kinds of things. None of these is the body. If it were the body, we would just call it the body. We wouldn't call the head, we would call it the body if it were the body, in the same way with the others. So clearly, none of these is the body. Body is merely a concept that we have come up with to describe all of these things taken in sum. Well, then you might say, well, all right, so the body doesn't exist. The body's a mere concept for all these different parts, but these parts exist. There's my head, there are my arms. For example, here's my hand. My hand exists, I can see it. Well, hand is a concept that we have come up with to describe a group of things that we wish to consider as though they were a unit. Your hand seems to exist, but it has parts. You have a thumb, a forefinger, a middle finger, a ring finger, a little finger, a palm, the back of the hand, and so on. None of these are a hand. You can't say that a thumb is a hand. If it were a hand, you would call it a hand, not a thumb. Well, then you might say, well, all right, hand doesn't exist, but the fingers do exist because I can see them. Well, all right, let's look at a finger. A finger has parts. It has joints. You can talk about the first joint, the second joint, the third joint, the bones, the skin, the flesh, the muscles, and so on. None of these things are the finger. If they were, we would call them finger and not whatever we call them. The point is simply that all such things are mere aggregates. The idea of aggregates was explained by the Buddha as being like a heap of something. For example, you can take a heap of or pile of rice as a unit, but you know perfectly well it is not. You're merely choosing to isolate that amount of rice and consider it as a unit for purposes of communication. In the same way, everything that we normally think of as an inherent unit really turns out to have parts. It really turns out to be an aggregate. Now, you can carry this on as long as you want until finally you might decide, well, everything must be made up of something. So there must at some point be something, however small it is, that is indivisible. There must, in short, be a partless particle. Well, if there is such a partless particle, either it occupies space or it doesn't. If it occupies space, then it faces at any given moment different directions. There is a part of it facing east, a part of it facing west, a part of it facing north, a part of it facing south, and so on. If that's true, it has parts. If that's not true, then it doesn't occupy space, and in what sense is it a physical particle? In short, if you analyze anything that you can isolate conceptually as a unit, you will discover that it is an aggregate and that it has parts. And this is why the Buddha said, form is emptiness. Now, this is not obvious to us. It is not obvious because it is not an object of direct cognition. We do not experience things as empty. It therefore must be determined through analysis. And through analysis, one can generate an inferential cognition of emptiness. Once you do so, the question might arise, well, if everything I can isolate and consider for analysis turns out not to be a true or inherent unit, then is there nothing whatsoever? Is the nature of things absolute nothingness, absolute non-existence? That is not true either, because the concept of absolute non-existence is predicated entirely on the concept of the true existence of one or more things. So that idea of dead emptiness, utter absolute nothingness, is merely another concept. Because there is cognitive capacity. We have innately the capacity to experience. This mere cognitive capacity, this mere ability to experience, is what is called Buddha nature. It is what is called, in Mahamudra terms, connate or co-emergent wisdom. That wisdom which has always been there, but has been unrecognized. It is what is called, by adherents of the breakthrough practice of the great perfection, primordially pure awareness. And the recognition of it is called arriving on the ground, or at the ground, of primordially pure awareness. It is what is called, by adherents of the leap-over practice of the great perfection, the basis of radiant appearances. Now, this cognitive capacity is not produced by meditation. It is not a result of meditation practice. Normally, it is concealed from us. But at the conclusion of the dissolution process, when the elements have dissolved one into another, and then the subtle dissolution process is completed, and everything has dissolved into dharmata, the nature of things, emptiness, Buddha nature, Mahamudra, the great perfection, whatever you want to call it, this nature as it is experienced. What we call dharmata, what we call the dharmadhatu, is experienced directly by everyone. However, if the person who experiences at that moment of death has prior experience of it, has familiarized him or herself with it during their previous life through meditation practice, they may recognize it. If they have not, they will experience it as mere absence, mere blankness, and ignorance will re-arise and start the re-arising of the bewildered appearances. Now you might think, well, if it appears nakedly at the time of death, how could it fail to be recognized? Don't forget, it is with us right now, and we don't see it. So it shouldn't be too surprising that we don't see it at the time of death. Therefore, it is extremely important to prepare yourself for this through practicing meditation. I'd like to stop there for this afternoon and not even have questions. I'm sorry, Rinpoche said that we don't have time for questions, but we don't. So I'd like to stop there. I'll try to leave more time for questions tomorrow afternoon.
Amen.